This is the story of a 19-year-old who had $47 in his bank account. He was sleeping on his sister's couch because he couldn't afford a place of his own. That 19-year-old was me. 4 years later, he had his first million. From the outside, it looked like luck, a good business, the right connections, but none of those things came first. His bank account didn't change first, his identity did. Somewhere during those 4 years, he stopped thinking like someone who hoped to become wealthy and started making decisions like someone who expected to. Everything that changed afterward started with that one shift. Here's what actually changed first: the decisions he stopped making, the habits he built instead, and the identity shift that made those habits stick. But first, let's go back to the beginning, to the couch, to the $47. The couch wasn't temporary. That's what nobody tells you about hitting bottom. You always think it's temporary, until months pass and it isn't anymore. He'd been there for 7 weeks. Every morning before his sister woke up, he folded the blanket and stacked the pillow on top. Not because she asked him to, because if the couch looked neat enough, maybe it wouldn't feel like he was living on it. He learned which floorboards squeaked too. It became a kind of game. Move through the apartment without waking anyone, without being seen more than necessary. Every morning followed the same pattern after that. Check messages, check the news, check anything, delay opening the banking app for as long as possible, because some mornings, that number felt worse than being hungry. He learned which floorboards squeaked too. It became a kind of game. Move through the apartment without waking anyone, without being seen more than necessary. Every morning followed the same pattern after that. Check messages, check the news, check anything, delay opening the banking app for as long as possible, because some mornings, that number felt worse than being hungry. $47. It had been $47 for 11 days, not because nothing was happening, but because everything he tried to fix it made it worse. A friend invited him to dinner that week, nothing expensive. He said he was busy. He wasn't busy. He just couldn't afford $18 for a plate of food, and he'd rather disappear for a night than explain that to someone his age who didn't understand it. That was the part that actually hurt, not the money. The hiding. Some nights, once everyone else was asleep, he'd make another peanut butter sandwich in the dark. Not because he was hungry, because eating in front of people made him feel like he was borrowing a life that wasn't his. Every time he opened his phone, someone was celebrating something. A promotion, a trip, a new apartment. He wasn't angry about it. He just kept wondering the same thing. What do they know that I don't? He almost believed the answer was, some people are just built for this, and I'm not one of them. Then, one evening, he heard one sentence he almost ignored completely. It wasn't advice. Nobody was trying to teach him anything. He didn't realize it that night or the next morning. But over the next few months, that single sentence quietly changed the way he made decisions, long before it changed his bank account. It happened on a Thursday, not a special day, just a shift at the coffee shop where he'd taken a part-time job to cover what little he could. 2 men sat at the corner table for almost 2 hours. He wasn't listening. He was wiping down tables, refilling cups, trying to disappear the way he'd gotten good at disappearing. But one sentence came through anyway. Not shouted, not dramatic, just said, plainly, like it was obvious. Broke people make decisions to survive the week. Wealthy people make decisions to build the next 10 years. That was it. No elaboration. The men moved on to something else, a golf trip, a business deal, something that had nothing to do with him. He finished his shift, walked home. Didn't think about it again that night. Or so he thought. 3 days later, a friend invited him to a birthday dinner. Nothing outrageous, just a nice restaurant. The kind of place where the bill adds up fast. He couldn't really afford it. But he went anyway, and put more on his card than he should have. Not because he needed to be there, but because he didn't want anyone to guess how bad things actually were. He wanted people to think he was doing better than he really was. He felt sick about it almost immediately. Not because of the money, because he'd proven the sentence wrong within a week of hearing it. He assumed that was that. Another idea that sounded good and meant nothing. For a while it seemed like he was right. What actually changed wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen in a single night. He didn't fully understand why that sentence had stayed with him. Maybe because, for the first time, someone had described exactly how he'd been living, without knowing they were describing him at all. A week later, a better-paying job offer came in. Same kind of work, more money. He took it. Turning it down would have been foolish, and he needed the money to survive. But this time, he did something different with it. The old version of him would have used the extra income to finally stop feeling behind. Better clothes, a nicer phone, something to prove things were turning around. Instead, he asked a question he'd never really asked before. What would the version of him with $1 million do with this money? The money wasn't really the investment. The person he was becoming was. So he opened a savings account he could barely put anything into, and put something into it anyway. He spent less time scrolling at night, and more time learning one skill he could actually sell. He started waking up earlier, not for any specific reason he could explain yet. None of it looked important. That was almost the point. It wasn't one decision, it was the first of hundreds, and none of them meant much on their own. A month in, his sister noticed he was up before her most mornings now. She asked why. He shrugged. He didn't really know how to explain it yet, but it was the first time in years he'd made a choice based on where he was going, instead of where he already was. And once he made one decision that way, it got a little easier to make the next one the same way. The next few months didn't feel like a transformation while he was living them. They felt like nothing. Wake up early, read for 20 minutes, practice the skill he was learning, just an hour some nights, less on the bad ones. Say no to things he used to say yes to. Say yes to things that scared him a little. He canceled 2 subscriptions he never used. Small money, but it was the first time he'd looked at where his money went instead of just watching it disappear. He started keeping a note on his phone, not a budget, not really, just a running list of every time he chose the 10-year decision over the survive the week one. Most days, there was only one entry. Some days, none. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing, partly because he wasn't sure it was working, partly because it still felt too small to explain out loud. 3 months later, something finally changed. Not because he got lucky, but because hours have a way of compounding too. The skill he'd been practicing quietly at night was finally good enough to be worth something to someone else. A stranger online needed help with a small project. Nothing glamorous. It paid $240. It wasn't the money that mattered, it was what the money proved. Someone had paid him for something he built with his own hands, on a couch, at midnight, with no one watching. He didn't celebrate much. He transferred half of it into the savings account that used to sit empty, and used the rest to keep learning. Then he found a second client, then a third. For the first time, it felt like he'd figured it out. That's exactly when the real test began. Nothing about his life looked different from the outside yet. Still the couch, still the same job, still $47 wasn't far behind him in his memory. But what had started compounding wasn't his money. It was his evidence, the growing proof that he could become someone different. 6 weeks after the third client, the work dried up. Not dramatically. No one fired him. The projects just ended, the way freelance work often does, and nothing new came in to replace them. 2 weeks passed, then 4. He checked his phone constantly, refreshing messages that weren't coming. The old fear came back fast, faster than he expected, like it had never really left. He started wondering if the $240, the second client, the third, if all of it had just been luck wearing a disguise. A few strangers who happened to need help at the right time, nothing repeatable, nothing real. The savings account he'd been building sat at $380. 3 months earlier, that number would have felt impossible. Tonight, it felt terrifyingly small. One night, he almost deleted the note on his phone, the list of decisions, the 10-year choices. It felt embarrassing now, like proof of how naive he'd been. He didn't delete it. For 11 days, he just couldn't think of a single decision worth writing down. Then, on a Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday, he opened it again and added one line, applied to 3 more listings. Not because he felt hopeful, because he'd decided, somewhere in those 11 days, that feeling hopeful wasn't actually a requirement. He didn't need to believe it would work. He just needed to keep making the decision as if it would. That was the difference this time. Not confidence, just repetition. The 3 listings turned into one reply. The reply turned into a small project. Not a breakthrough, just enough to keep going. That became the pattern for the next year. Not a straight line upward, more like a slow, uneven climb. A good month, then a quiet one, then a good one again. He learned to stop panicking during the quiet months, because by now, he had enough evidence that they always ended. He raised his prices once, nervously, certain no one would say yes. Someone did. He raised them again 6 months later. Fewer people said yes that time, but the ones who did paid enough that it didn't matter. Somewhere in that year, he moved out of his sister's apartment. Nothing extravagant, a small studio, barely bigger than the couch had felt like, but it was his, and paying that first month's rent with money he'd built himself meant more to him than the number on the receipt. He kept the note on his phone the entire time. It was hundreds of lines long now. He rarely read the old entries anymore. He didn't need to. The person who wrote the first one was already starting to disappear. Applied to 3 listings, said no to a purchase he didn't need, raised his rate, saved instead of spent. None of them looked like the beginning of a success story. Looking back, that was the point. Big outcomes were built from decisions that barely seemed worth remembering at the time. Years later, people would look at the result and call it an overnight success. They never saw the years when nothing looked like it was working. There was no single moment where everything changed. One afternoon, reviewing his accounts out of habit more than excitement, he noticed a number he almost scrolled past. His net worth had crossed $1 million. No music, no countdown, no one to call. He sat with it for a second, waiting to feel something enormous. Mostly he just felt tired, the good kind, the kind that comes from finally putting something down after carrying it a long time. He closed the laptop and made dinner. The number didn't feel like an ending. It barely felt like anything at all. It was just the latest entry in a list that had started with $47. A week later, he visited his sister. She was making coffee in the kitchen, same as always. The couch was still there, same spot, same worn cushion on the left side. He sat down while he waited, and without thinking about it, folded the blanket beside him and set it on the armrest. He caught himself doing it, stopped, looked at it for a second. He didn't live here anymore. Nobody was asking him to fold anything. There was no version of this morning where anyone would have noticed if he hadn't. He smiled, then unfolded it again and sat back down. His sister called that the coffee was ready. He stood up. The couch was still the same. He wasn't. So maybe the real question was never, how do I make $1 million? Maybe it was always, what would the person you're trying to become decide to do today?